All right. This is Eric Hoare with Punk Globe magazine, and I'm here with the filmmakers on the new Zeros documentary. We've got Anthony Laddish and Michael Webber. And so first off, like, why the Zeros? They're amazing. I saw them recently in the Bay Area, and they just rocked my world. I mean, they were amazing, but it's like they're not the most well-known band, but I'm stoked to hear about it because when I look online, there's just not a lot about them. So what
I think,
inspired you guys to do this?
well, I
Well,
think
you
that, yeah, sorry.
go ahead, Tony.
I think the answer to the question is in the question. It is that there is not enough known about the Zeros. That's what makes it an interesting story. I think that they were an iconic fixture in the first wave of punk rock on the West Coast, and um, you know, and despite the fact that they get left out of a lot of history books, I think that their story is really, really interesting. And I think a missing piece in the sort of overall puzzle of the story that gets told about that era.
Yeah, agreed. Eric, your introduction was pretty much on point for why we thought the Zeros, you know, whether or not the world needs the 127th Beatles documentary. Beatles fans will always watch them, but as far as we were concerned, this was a really interesting untold story. And I think too, anybody who's been around them and you saw them recently, Eric. I mean, I think there's a whole misunderstanding about that first wave of punk rock, and the Zeros are the embodiment of that. But so were a lot of the other people we interviewed for this film. So, I mean, I've had numerous people say, West Coast punk was a bunch of white skinheads from Orange County, and that first wave wasn't. And the Zeros really, again, as soon as you look at a picture of them, you realize that 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 misconception needs to be rebutted.
The Zeros are a perfect representation of what the reality of that scene was, which is that it was inclusive. It was female, brown, and queer largely, and it was sort of open to anyone who wanted to participate at that point. And as we've interviewed, 60 people, all these conversations we've had, it's pretty clear that they were just accepting sort of almost of all comers, up to the point at which that movement sort of started becoming co-opted. So like hearing stories from some of the female photographers, and I think some of the best photographers, if not the best photographers from that era, were largely female identifying folks, and hearing the stories of what it was like in 79 and 80 when a different crowd of people started coming to shows and no one felt safe standing next to the stage taking photographs anymore. And then you see that scene sort of splinter off into, sort of the Blasters, Gun Club, kind of the rootsy side of things. And then you also see another side of it. What's not in the rockabilly scene. You see another side of it sort of splinter off into more sort of electronic and gothy stuff, and all points in between. But it was the music that was made after the fact from those first wave punks is just incredible, as well. But as this very short little window of time has been our focus. We've we've had a lot of really fascinating conversations with people about what it felt like to be, have started something and then be accused of like not having been there.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's really cool because I mean, even Ginger Coyote, who created Punk Globe, was part of that scene.
Mm-hmm.
very much so.
And I know that she mentioned that she's in the film,
Yeah,
and which is
she
super
is.
cool. And it's interesting because I grew up with the second wave of punk, which really started right after that, and that so I know what you're talking about because it's when I came out to San Francisco because I grew up in the Midwest. And it's like there was this whole punk that happened before punk that I didn't know about that I started to discover. And it's so hard to get information, like bands like Crime, which were
Yeah.
huge in San Francisco. I actually got to play with one of the guys at a show a while back, and it was just like, I was like, oh my God, this is so cool, right? But try and find their music.
Hmm.
Well, what's cool about it too is that first wave that we're talking about with the zeros, the weirdos, the screamers, you know, uh, punk hadn't been defined yet.
Hmm.
And several of the people we interviewed comment on that. It was a much more musically adventurous movement. It wasn't just about the music, but you know, a couple of different interviewees had said, if you didn't know what it was punk,
Yeah,
But
I like
you
that.
listen to those bands like the Weirdos and the Screamers and the Zeros, they don't sound at all like one another, but they cohabitated the same scene before it had, any rigid uh, form to it. And for everything else that we say about the Zeros, you saw them recently. They're a great band. They were so
Uh,
musical
yeah.
and Beat Your Heart Out's one of the, as far as I'm concerned, just one of the best power pop songs anybody made. And so I mean it's funny because people could almost debate whether or not they were a punk band. Well, it depends on what your definition is, but they were certainly embraced by that scene. That's good enough for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did seem like Maximum Rock and Roll that came out of San Francisco, for example, really narrowly defined punk in a way that just did push all these parts of it to the side and made it, to me, way less fun.
Yeah,
Because I like
well,
the adventure of it. I like the
yeah.
weirdness of it, the craziness of it.
And when you know what their influences were, they liked the Ramones, they liked the Sex Pistols, but and of course Johnny Thunders and the New York Dolls were a huge influence. But before that, I mean, I've talked to Javier before about his love of the guitar sound of those early Alice Cooper records. And that's the kind of wild card you get in there that once it's been mentioned, you can't unhear it. It's like, yeah, of course, but I don't think that that's really probably at the top of everybody's punk influences.
Well, yeah, because I mean, there is something to how do I say this? The Zeros started before they knew who the Ramones were. They started sort of before they knew who the Sex Pistols were, even, and they were getting all of their information out of Rock Scene magazine and Cream and wherever else. And so, yeah, it was the New York Dolls and Kiss and Bowie and Glitter. They were I mean the there was so much of a Glitter influence to what the Zeros sounded like in on those first few singles, and they made a band simultaneously with other people who were making bands, and then all of those bands collectively started to be understood in the public eye as being punk bands. So when you they were uh, they were first.
Yeah,
They were
yeah,
among the first, and they were among the best, and to ever do it. And it's not to say that they didn't invent anything, but they certainly came to their own conclusions without jumping on a bandwagon.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I do think and Eric, I guard against trying to make something I'm involved in seem more important than it really is, but I do feel like we're sort of catching the last people through the turnstile in terms of an era. I worked in record stores in the late 70s and early 80s, way before the internet. And matter of fact, when CDs came out, I was working in record stores, the first ones. And that whole idea of getting information through music journalism first, it had some really curious, pretty precious revelations that I think younger people who watch this will have their heads spinning because yeah, they're talking about you might mention somebody who just became your favorite band, but you haven't heard them yet. You just saw their pictures and Rock Scene and Cream and they look so cool. But go ahead and add them to your favorites. But
Cool.
there was just that role of print media at that time. And I got it in Kansas City. I mean, that's where I first saw the Zeros was, we'd get Bomp magazine and we always knew something really fascinating was going on the two coasts. And so, Cream and Bomp and those rock scene for sure, they were really big to me. And they come up in these interviews time and time again. And I kind of feel sorry for younger people. I mean, they don't know what they're missing, so it's okay. But God, I love the adventurism of just going out and trying to find some band that you read about. You know,
Yeah, but it's also so cool because it's like the scene got to develop almost in isolation,
yeah,
where it's got where it's so hard for people to do that nowadays because
yeah,
the minute somebody says, "Oh, that's good," it goes out to everybody and people start to try and copy it. Where that was the whole thing, where it's like just do what feel comes natural and
yeah,
And nobody's isolated. There's no isolation, so nothing can happen in isolation anymore. I
yeah.
to go back to sort of round back to answer that first question of like why are we making a movie about the Zeros? Um, it's I've been thinking about this a lot um, because it's not enough that the Zeros were incredible, and it's not enough that they weren't nearly as famous or well known as they or successful, quote unquote successful, which is something we unpack in the movie. Is what does success mean? It's not that they weren't as successful as some of the other people in their cohort. It doesn't have any, that's not the point, and it's also not about, I mean, there's something unique about the story of the Zeros, in regard to the fact that there was such a familial connection between all of them, whether it was family of choice or family or actual blood, relatives, but like there is such a connection between them that I think it just gave them their sound something, a cohesion that I don't think necessarily everybody else had.
Mhm.
I don't know, Mike. You can probably pick that up somehow.
Yeah, I mean, they were very, a term again that gets used by a lot of their contemporaries is musical, which wasn't always the case, at least not in any conventional sense in a lot of punk. And I don't want to throw out too many spoilers, but somebody at one point just said, if you were playing drums in the Zeros, you're looking at the back of a guy whose older brother's in Santana. That wasn't the typical profile of punk bands in the 1970s. So again, they were very musical. What struck me, because again, I do a lot of research, and what struck me as uncommon was just how consistent a lot of the messages were about them. And people would comment on the fact that yeah, they were younger than everybody else. The punk scene was all about being young and being an outsider. And you know when they got together, three of them were 15 years old, so they were really young. And what's curious about that is they were also the most professional. Like, what an odd combination. Everybody says, when you saw them in those early shows, these guys had already put in their 1,000 hours of playing together and rehearsing. They really wanted to be tight. And what a strange thing for the youngest band on the scene to be the tightest.
That's pretty cool. Well, it's also think about when you guys talk about, success and I think so often, in our country, like success is defined by money and fame.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Where like I would just, to me, success, I might define it more as like being able to do what you love and
Yeah.
working with the people you love working with. And it sounds like that to me defines their success. And I saw recently that they're actually playing Little Steven's cruise with the Damned and X. I was
Mhm.
like, that's pretty badass.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
nice to see their name on that lineup. I think for sure. I think that's getting some due. And the thing to me that's the the idea of like, anybody that says that they didn't care about success is not being honest with you. I don't think. I think everybody wants to somehow be some sort of success, and whether that's a success within the 150 kids that were part of that first Hollywood or San Francisco scene, which was another couple hundred kids, up there. whether or not it was being well known, well respected, well revered in the amongst those few people, or if it was getting a record deal like the Dickies and
Hmm.
putting out an LP on a label. Everybody wanted some level of success, but it's just to your point. I think at some point when you're making music that is sort of by the people for the people of the people, which is what punk rock was, you redefine what it is in terms of making it. Like, did we make it? It's like, yeah, when we made it, we played a great show that was packed. People were hanging from the rafters, and we sold. We sold 107 inches, and we don't have any more T-shirts left, and you know what I mean? It's like that you redefine what it is in terms of making it, because I mean, who made it out of that scene? The Go-Go's made it, but they became a new wave band.
Right.
X sort of. I mean, X made it. I mean, I guess like they're still a band and remained a band, but at the same time, it's not like they never they weren't you know selling out stadiums or anything.
Yeah.
It's like you just have to come to an understanding of what that scene was, and what the possibilities were and what the desires were. And if anything, I'll just say, Javier eloquently says in the movie that he didn't get into punk rock to have a 30-year career in the music business. And I find it such an endearing moment for me in our film, in which you really get to see. It's one of the most honest sort of moments, I think, for me, from him, of him sort of wrestling with this idea of like, what did success mean. And I don't think that they saw themselves as very successful, because they had a great metric for what success was.
Yeah, it was healthy in terms of, Eric, I mean, you make a very valid distinction about what success means to different people, but I don't think between the three of us, anybody's interested outside of maybe our blood relatives in what we were doing when we were teenagers. And so I think they find part of their gratification just in the fact that, Robert Lopez wrote Beat Your Heart Out when he was 15, 16 years old. And it's a really cool song and people are still covering it. You know, that's pretty great. Nobody, really cares what we were doing when we were teenagers, but 50 years later, they're more than worthy of a documentary. And I think one of the things, and it's funny, the longer we work on it, the more I think I take it personally, anyways, is anytime I pick up one more punk list of the 100 most influential, or a book at, Tower Records, or not Tower anymore, Amoeba, that's where I was. But, and the zeros aren't in there. I mean, it just seems absurd who's in and who's out. And I think, unfortunately, they got there too early. And, I mean, again, we're not the first ones to acknowledge this, but, you know, that infrastructure of the record labels in New York that propped up Blondie and the Talking Heads, the Ramones, those were major labels spending money on punk rock. And that didn't reach the West Coast for a couple more years. And by then, the Zeros were already splintering.
And the
And
punk scene was over. That first
yeah,
punk scene was over.
yeah,
Well,
and so yeah, they maybe had they been a bit older and more mature, they might have hit that point right in the sweet spot. But on the other hand, what's great about it is Beat Your Heart Out and Don't Push Me Around and Wimp sound like they were written by guys their age. And if anybody older than them had tried to write those songs, it would have sounded weird. So, I mean, not in a good way. So, you know, they were perfect for their time, but the time wasn't perfect.
That's
but I
great.
also really
Yeah.
appreciate like them coming out of Chula Vista, which is like, I mean, the only thing I know about Chula Vista is I was down in San Diego doing a show, and at the last minute somebody said, "Hey, can you come to Chula Vista and do something?" And this is back in the 90s, and no internet. And I just like, they're like, if you can make it, great. But they were doing, the show was, and I wasn't able to make it after all, but I wish I had, because they called it a rabbit show. And I'm like, what's a rabbit show? They're like, well, we set up bass guitar and drums, and every band gets to play two songs, and then we just keep jumping around until the police come and we all run away. And so it's like to think of like, years later, that's the scene, but it's like how much they were up against to be able to do what they did is phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, two guys from Chula Vista, two from National City. Um, you know, not even from LA or San Francisco. They're from the suburbs of San Diego, which is pretty much a Navy town, especially in the 70s. I mean, there was just so much about them that would have been like pushing the boulder up the hill. But they made it. And again, teenage Mexican American kids, uh, yeah, you can't help but I mean it's a beautiful underdog story. And again, I don't think maybe they wouldn't have been as cool if they had been from a more obvious place. I mean, I think that isolation also probably served them well.
Well, yeah, I mean they come by their punk rock outsider credibility pretty honestly, considering their age and where they were, where they grew up, and um, and when you think about it, most of that scene, that first Hollywood scene, and very much the San Francisco scene, most of those folks were older. I mean, X, you said, Mike, you said something about the Zeros putting in their 1,000 hours. I mean, X put in 10,000 hours, but by the time they got on stage as X, I mean, they were seasoned musicians, and most of the other musicians in the LA scene had, at least some had been in bands before, but or were just a little older, like they were
Yeah.
in their 20s, and the other than Red Cross, probably wins the prize of youngest, cool band of all time, but like the Zeros are right there in terms of like actually being teenagers, actually writing teenage music, and then not being from that scene, not being from Hollywood, not being there every day to hang out and have everybody, like that was a scene that really traded on like social capital, and the Zeros didn't necessarily have a ton of social capital being from where they were, so they just overcompensated by being fucking incredible
Yeah.
and undeniable. Like they were undeniably good,
Yeah.
and I think everybody loved them and they wanted to adopt them because they were so young and so adorable and at the time, and and just so fucking good. And so I and then a couple of years later, when hardcore sort of starts to coalesce on the edges of all these scenes, then it's young kids. Then it is 14-year-old kids who are starting bands because they had been listening to all of the first wave punks. And so then it's kids who are starting bands, and then it's much more which is its own really interesting story, and for whatever unfortunate things hardcore brought to the table that may have helped splinter the first wave of punk on the West Coast and wherever else. Boy, does it have its own set of really incredible stories that come along with it in terms of really creating the DIY aesthetic, booking your own tours, it was mostly the hardcore kids who were going on tour. I mean, the first wave punks, other than the Ramones and some of the New York bands, I mean, they weren't really. Zeros did tour a little, but yeah. Anyway, I don't know. Sorry, I don't know where.
No, but that's a great point though too. There wasn't really a template to do what bands were doing even 5, 10 years later.
Right, it's crazy.
And it's again, it's hard for people who didn't live through that period to understand how difficult it would be to actually even do something like that during that time period.
Well, and again, I'm going to go back to a point I made earlier, but maybe put a finer point on it, which was that the New York scene, once the label smelled money, they were willing to put money into it, and you did have CBGBs and those clubs as well, that provided a degree of hospitality to the punk scene, and the old guard of the record labels out on the West Coast were trying to actually suppress punk. And, Bill Graham, who'd been such a anti-establishment figure in San Francisco, hated punk and was, you know, part of the
Newest
force
decade.
trying to suppress it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he only embraced it when, he finally got around to the Clash. But yeah, it was a scene, in LA was particularly, and I'm talking about formal LA, not the inhabitants of the city, but the city hall and all. I mean, they actively worked against the punk scene, and it was something that would have looked familiar to folks. I mean, one of the people we introduced was, or interviewed rather, was Dominic Priori, who wrote the book about the law enforcement on Sunset Boulevard, trying to close shows in the 1960s, and it was really another one of those everything old is new again, because they tried to do the same thing 10 years later. It's funny how many parallels there are between the punk scene and the hippies, even though they were, at least in superficial terms, one was a response to the other one. That was
Uh,
a really clumsy answer, but
and that's great though. It's like, who were some of the people you were able to talk to? Because I mean, I know what you're talking about with that scene. It's so hard to find the people, to connect with the people. It's so hard to find the music. I mean, but I love that you guys did the diligence to do that.
I'm going to leave most of that answer to Anthony, but I will make my introductory remark to what Anthony's going to say, with the fact that I've compared it time and again to like being a prosecutor trying to prosecute the mob, because you know give us five names, and neither Anthony nor I are from L.A. nor San Francisco, and so a lot of it was getting hold of that first or second person, and they would wind up at the end of the interview saying, "You know what, that was fun. Let me call a couple of people for you." And so it was really surprisingly and happily organic at times, in terms of how one person, and Ginger put us in touch with some other people as well. So I mean, that's just exactly how it worked. But I'm going to let Anthony talk about the particulars.
Yeah, uh, Ginger putting us in touch with Louis Perez the third
Yeah,
is that's a great example of that. Of that process, and I've been making documentaries for a long time, and it really is like you turn over one rock, and then you just keep turning rocks over. But I've got the list. I don't know that you want an exhaustive reading of the list, but I can give you some high points.
I would love to hear it. Yeah.
We interviewed Alice Bagg. We interviewed Chip Kinman from the Dills. We interviewed Cliff Roman. We had Denny DeGorio, who played bass in True Believers, as well as the Offs in San Francisco. We interviewed a lot of some weird ones, not weird ones, but some great ones, like Javier's childhood friend Gary. I mean, where they were like guitar buddies. Ginger was a high point. Helen Keller and Trudy, from that first wave of Hollywood scene, they were icons there. I'm trying to think of who. Gene Caffeine was a really fun interview. My favorite day, and I'll just say, like, I can go down the list: Keith Morris, John Reese, Joe Nick Patowski in Austin. That was one of Mike's ideas that turned out to be an amazing interview. Kevin Seconds, Kira Rossler, Kim Warnick from the Fastbacks, Mario Escovedo, of course, Mario Rubalcaba, Mark Stern, Martin, Eloise Wong and Martin, her father, from the Linda Lindas, Melanie Vayman from the Muffs, Ronnie Barnett from the Muffs, Paul Rossler from the Screamers, Penelope and Greg from the Avengers, Rosie Flores was a great one. So we had all these killer interviews, but my favorite day. So I'll just cap this off by telling you that I've lived a pretty charmed life when it's come to filmmaking and what I've been able to do for a living, and not that anybody's made a living off of this movie, but one of my favorite days on this movie was when we spent a little over a month out in LA, living out in LA, interviewing people a few summers ago, and one day we woke up early and we went to go get breakfast burritos, and then we drove to Mark Mothersbaugh's Mutato Musica studio, and we interviewed Mark Mothersbaugh, and it was, I mean, incredible, killer interview. He's such a erudite, intellectual, incredible interview. Could not have been kinder, nice, the best. I love that guy. And then we left Mark Mothersbaugh's interview, went and grabbed some lunch, and then we went back to Koreatown where I was staying with my in-laws, and my mother-in-law lived in a like a additional dwelling next to my sister-in-law and brother-in-law, and so I was staying in the Nana flat back there, and so we set up and interviewed Jeff and Steve McDonald from Red Cross in my mother-in-law's living room. So it was Mark Mothersbaugh and Red Cross in one day, and it was one of the best days I've ever had doing any kind of filmmaking ever. And if I could go back and relive that day, I would. It was such a fun day. It was so good.
Yeah.
So we've had and then there's anyway. Go ahead, Mike, because there's a
No,
lot
I
of
was just
people
gonna say yeah, I think you intentionally left one for me, but along the same lines. I mean, just a really cool time. I think the same day we interviewed Ron from Crime was when we wound up at Jello
Oh, that's who I played
Biafra's.
with.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
Bob Greco. Yeah, that
right.
And then we wound up at Jello Biafra's that
Yeah.
evening, and that was a hoot. But I had met Jello years earlier. I don't know how far afield we want to get on this. I could tell you the real quick version, but I met Jello years ago when I was at the University of Kansas as an undergrad, and William Burroughs was living in Lawrence at the time, and I think Jello had come to town for this River City reunion thing that William Burroughs put together, and Jello and I had always, I reminded him of the story, but the first time that I met Burroughs was in Lawrence, and I was standing in line behind him at a grocery store. He was buying cat food and kitty litter, and he was 23 cents short. And I'd been waiting, as an 18-year-old kid, and I was convinced that, when I finally got to meet Burroughs, I would, he'd immediately recognize that this was somebody cool who he wanted to hang out with. And of course, that was never going to happen. But, I'm a hero for a minute because I've got a quarter and he's 23 cents short. So he grabbed the quarter out of my hand without ever acknowledging that quarter had been in the hand of an arm of a human being. And he just handed the quarter to the cashier, and she thanked him, and he started to walk out. And I think Tony's already cussed on this, so I'm going to assume we can use profanity,
Oh yeah.
especially if I'm quoting William Burroughs directly. But he suddenly realized that I was still standing in that line looking at him, waiting for the epiphany to happen with my hand out. And he turned and looked at me and he goes, "What do you want? Your fucking change?" And then he wheeled around and walked out. And that was my Burroughs moment. And once I reminded Jello of that story, it was just it's good icebreaker. But yeah, I mean, and it's another funny thing. I mean, Rick, you said, Eric, I'm sorry, you're from the Midwest as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you get people who will tell you, geez, whatever you do, don't tell these guys you're fans of theirs. Try not to seem impressed. You got a job to do and all that. But Tony and I are from Kansas City. People from Kansas City are genetically incapable of concealing our pleasure at where we are and who we're with. And so I think that that came out in several occasions that we were genuinely happy to be there and love talking about music with people. And that's how people wound up calling up their friends and saying, what, these guys were pretty fun, and I think you'd like them. And so, they introduced us to the next person, and it. Go ahead, Anthony.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just gonna say, I hit those high points in terms of names that people would know, but like I said, we interviewed like 60 people on this movie, and what that means is that we also interviewed a lot. We interviewed the Baba and Robert's fathers together. We interviewed the aunt, the Lopez aunt, Aunt Nell, who is as responsible for the aesthetic vibe of the early zeros as anyone in terms of fashion. She was in the fashion industry, and she was amazing. And interviewing Javier's brother, Mario was great, and his sister Dolly was great, and like it was just like it was. And again, like, and then just finding like these other little like avenues into, I think, so to Mike's point about like people turning us on to other people again, I Martin Wong, I think, turned us on to Jimmy Alvarado,
Yeah.
who is a real fixture in that LA scene, and man, I just like I love that dude. His interview was great, and again, we just got lucky. We just got really lucky, and you try your best not to be an asshole, and you try to just be a good person and have a genuine goal and have a genuine mission statement of
Yeah.
like, we love the zeros. We just want the world to know about them, and
Well, and it occurs to me not to, put too fine a point on it, but we were outsiders. I mean, we're a couple of guys raised in Kansas City. I was 13 in 1977, so I wasn't part of that scene at the Mask. And you know, you're gonna have to play the hand that's dealt you. And had we been 10 years older and been living in Los Angeles or San Francisco, this might have looked like a different film. But I like to think, we took being outsiders and have made the best of that because we asked the same questions that everybody else who wasn't there would ask, and we were just lucky in that all the people we spoke to, by and large, were respectful of that and really willing. And it's funny, I've been asked before, and if you were going to ask this question, I'm sorry to preempt you, Eric, but people have said, "Well, was there anybody you were really disappointed that you weren't able to get?" And I'll say a couple of people who'd agreed to be interviewed passed away before we had the chance to talk to them, and that was very disappointing. But as far as anybody else who ignored our request or said no because we're nobodies, you know what? We weren't meant to interview them anyways. I have way too much respect and gratitude for all the people who said yes to spend another second thinking about people who wouldn't have participated in this. And I do feel like the real punks are exactly the kind of people who'd say, "I've never heard of these guys. Of course I'll do it."
I think just the work you've done, the people you've talked to speaks volumes also about the impact the Zeros had on those communities. I mean, the fact that, it sounds like people had some, depth and stories and richness to share with you is incredible.
Yeah, well, and it was really lovely how often people said, "I hope that this, turns out well for them." Like, it's such a magnanimous gesture from certain people to say, we're happy with our own lot, but yeah, the Zeros deserve better, and we hope this film turns out great for them. I mean, that was probably the thing everybody said as soon as the cameras were turned off.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
Is there like a working title for the film yet, or?
it's called Beat Your Heart Out.
I love it.
Yeah. And yeah. I was like, you didn't ask anything else other than the name of the movie. Yeah, Beat Your Heart Out. That's
Yeah,
it.
no, I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Is it, I mean, I'm so excited because like you dug into a part of punk that is so difficult to get access to. Like, I mean, I've gotten access to it by, I'll meet people, they'll tell me stories,
Yeah.
and I love stories. I love the stories that people tell because that's the picture of our lives. But um, were you inspired after doing this film? Was there anybody you went? Oh, my dog's sitting behind me, sorry.
Okay.
Um, is there anybody who went, wow, I'm kind of inspired to do something after this? Was there something that really excited you? Or are there like 80 projects?
I will like making a music documentary is not for the weak of heart. It is not. It genuinely. I think one of the most difficult things I've ever done as a filmmaker has been making music documentary, like a feature length music documentary, and so I don't have any plans to make another music documentary anytime soon. I need a break. I'm going to need a vacation from my vacation here. So, um, but there, as you do the walk the trail of making the movie, I have basically a notes app on my phone that might as well be full. Like no more room in the inn for ideas, because it's just as you're going, you just start you just start making notes of like next up is going to be this thing, next up is going to be that thing, next up is going to be this thing. But I think I'm going to spend some time writing screenplays and not making a documentary after this one. So
Eric, I'll add, uh, so as Anthony says, we've interviewed 60 or so people. I'm thinking it's around 180 hours of interviews, tucked into that. And so right off the bat, that there's about 178 hours and 30 minutes that aren't going to make it into the film. And what I will say is so frustrating about that process. Man, people told us some unbelievably great stories that had nothing to do with the zeros. And and so having sat in for all these interviews and knowing how much great stuff there is, I mean, I probably had the thought at least 5 or 6 times, well, it's this individual, I mean, somebody's got to make the Rosie Flores documentary, for example.
Mhm.
And there were just so many great moments that I wish we could make a documentary about every one of those bands, but I do think we're making a documentary that is bigger than the band that is the subject in terms of the fact that it's about that first wave. But I'll also say, and again, Anthony is an experienced filmmaker. I'm an airport planner who's co-producing this film, but who used to work in the lowest rungs of the music business in record stores. And Anthony tells me that this is fairly typical, in as much as you start off thinking you're going to make this documentary, and then pretty soon you find out you're making a different film altogether. And in some ways, it's come back around because I think at first we just thought we were making a documentary about a really cool punk band, and then at some point I said, and I should mention my wife's from Mexico City, and so I am married to a Mexican family. Um, that you realize as we're talking to the fathers and the aunts and the brothers and all that, well, we're really making a film about four Mexican American families whose kids joined a punk band. And, so much of that influence comes through, especially, and I think it's going to be the part of the story that will be gripping to a lot of folks, is everything that happened before they became the Zeros, just in terms of, their upbringings, and one's as interesting as the next. And so, you know, all those cultural attributes, not only of the Zeros, but of Alice Bag and a lot of others. It's a really rich story. I'll just say for my part, and Anthony's heard me say this before, I really try to be vigilant about not allowing myself to get overly enthusiastic about this, because you want to keep a clear head about it. But I've seen the most recent cut, and I'm really proud of it. I think we've made a really good film that I think will surprise a lot of people in terms of how many different areas it touches upon in addition to punk rock.
Yeah, I can't
It's
wait to see it. Where are you going to be showing it? Is it going to be, are you going to be doing some independent theaters, go straight to streaming?
it won't go straight to streaming. That's for sure. I think
Can we count on an
we
SF showing?
yeah, there
All
will
right, good.
be a San Francisco
Good.
show. We'll do something in L.A., something in San Francisco, something in San Diego. Probably we'll do something in Kansas City because that's where I live. And but I think the my obviously I think we'll submit it to film festivals and we'll do sort of a festival run with it. I don't tend to be terribly ambitious from a uh, you know success metric that other people consider monetary sort of success. I'm very much like those early punks in that regard. And so my goals really are like screen it in, festivals that care about it, to people that will care about it, and then I think we want to take it on tour. So we want to take the film city to city to to a handful of different markets, and basically put together like a traveling roadshow where we can go and potentially even just like put an all-star band together of of people from that era, maybe folks that were in the movie, and just have them learn sort of have them put like a covers set together of stuff from that era maybe, and then yeah, just like I just I think that that's the most organic thing that we could do. And so like we started this movie with the understanding that Mike and I were basically just gonna suffer and pay for it out of pocket and not really try to get investors or get anybody else involved. And for the we've been pretty fortunate to have a couple of generous people that have just helped out here and there, and we're grateful for those folks. But most of this has just been Mike and I and our cinematographer Andy Romero, who's donated all of his time. Our editor Paul D. Jones, who's from Manchester, England. Our sort of archivist Casey Dewey. And it's kind of just been us. Like, it's going to be the shortest credit list of all time, in terms of like who actually made the film. And we have a couple of composers that are working on music for the film as well. And so we wanted to make it in a punk rock way. We like if we had gone out and pre-sold the idea to HBO or Showtime or Netflix or somebody, then there's somebody else's thumb would have been on the scale, and I just wasn't comfortable with that. I wanted to. I knew the castle I wanted to build, and I didn't want anybody's fucking input. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like I really didn't want anybody telling us what movie we were supposed to be making, other than us and the input of the band, and and that was pretty much it. Like, I just wanted to make the movie I wanted to make, that we wanted to make, and then if somebody wants to come buy it and pay us for it, and then they've got notes, then we're more than happy to hear some notes. But other than that, like, fuck it. Like, I just wanted to make this movie, just like I was making a record, like, that I didn't want a label telling me whether or not there was a single on it.
Yeah,
I was
I'm
going to say,
super
and
excited.
it would be self-serving to try to suggest, and it'd also be deceiving to suggest we had some great master plan, that Anthony said we wanted to do it on a punk rock way. We had to do it a punk rock way. Anthony and we're not trust fund kids. My father's a public school teacher. My mother was a dental assistant. So we don't have anybody backing us that way with family money. So we had to do it this way. But getting back to what I said about when we went out to interview folks for this movie, they just ask you the question, where are you guys staying? It's like, we're staying at a Days Inn, and the floors, stick if you stand in one place too long. We were doing this out of pocket, and it's funny because the people we interviewed more often than not would be saying, "Well, that's pretty punk," that's there was a recognition about the fact that we weren't staying at the Hiltons while we're doing this. We're coming in really cheap. We're borrowing cars. It was yeah, it was kind of guerrilla tactics.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky. I have in-laws in LA, and like I said, like my mother-in-law, let me stay on her couch and borrow her car, and like I couldn't have done this without those folks. But that's just like anybody who's like, I couldn't have made that record without borrowing my buddy's bass. Like sorry to continue to going back to that metaphor, but I think that there's something to it, um, uh, because yeah, I just don't. It just I don't think it would have. I don't think the film would be um, as pure an exhibition of like DIY aesthetic. Had we had, there were points along the way, and don't get me wrong, I don't want to mischaracterize this. There were points along the way where we had folks get involved who would kind of like who tried to bring the cavalry in. You know what I mean? Like, we're gonna get you a shitload of money. I'm like, I like money. That's great. Like, I stopped working so that I could work on this film. I stopped doing other production work so I could do this film. So like money would have been nice, but it never really panned out. And no shame, no. We love the people that tried to help. I mean, we love the people that tried to help. They were just dynamite people who cared about the movie. And eventually, it just it became pretty aware that like we're the only ones left in the room because we're the only ones like we were the only ones left in the room. And when we went to go do the interviews, it was Mike was almost every single interview, and it was a 2-person crew, myself and Andy Romero, the cinematographer. And Andy and I did all the audio, all the lighting, all of the everything, all the camera, everything. And because this is what we do for a living, and we've done this for a living for 25 years apiece, and so we just know what we're doing, and we know how to do it with very little other help. And every once in a while we would have somebody else help us out. And and again, that just lends itself to this sort of DIY. People are expecting a bigger film crew, and it's just two or three people that show up, and hump the gear in. And I might be the director, but I'm still setting up the lights.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's just the way that goes, because that's
Yeah. If people want to get in touch with you or just follow the production process, find out when it's going to be shown, what's the best way for them to do that?
there's an Instagram that I never use, but give me a second and I'll find it. My Instagram is MILEDEEP _films, Films. In the uh, Instagram for the film is, bear with caller, and I will tell you. Um, it's no spaces, beat your heart out _documentary.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait to see it. I can't wait to meet you guys in person in San Francisco because I've really enjoyed talking with you both. And I'm just so glad that you took this project on because I mean this is a story I want to hear. And I love like the like just how holistically you approached it. So I can't wait. Thank you again for your time and I hope to see you soon.
All right.
Hey,
Thank
thank
you very
you,
much.
man. Thanks for asking. I mean, seriously, like it means a lot to us. And Mike, I'll let you kind of have the last word. But like Eric, it means a lot that you would ask. We're happy to be included in anything that we can that's going to shine a light on these guys. So, um, yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I mean, we again, we paid for a lot of this out of pocket, and we really hope we break even. But I think the more realistic expectation is we hope it means a lot to people who are willing to invest the hour and a half or so to watch the film. So, Eric, we're really grateful to you for helping us get the word out about it, and for your interest in it. And it's been a real pleasure, I know, for Anthony and I to speak with you today.
No,
Yeah.
thank you both. Thank you.